Welcome to the MenTell Health Podcast, a podcast to talk about men's mental health. I'm Tim, and today I would like to talk to you about why I spend 3 times a day for multiple months spinning around myself for 60 seconds at a time. Before we begin, as always, a brief disclaimer that I am not a mental health professional in any shape or form. I'm just a normal dude, bloke, lad, guy, whatever you want to call it, who wants to talk about men's mental health and who wants to create a space for every person to talk about men's mental health. As I said, this is episode 3 in a 10-episode series in which I will discuss my own journey, how I came to be versed with my own mental health, and what steps I took. In episode 1, I told you how a game of SpongeBob Monopoly left me crying on the sofa, and in episode 2, I told you how I was so incredibly lucky for finding a therapist within 3 months, because for everybody else, or for most people, it is incredibly difficult to make that happen within 6 months even. Today, I will talk about what kind of therapy I had, namely cognitive behavioral therapy, short CBT, which is for the most part one of the most done or most prescribed therapies for people suffering from depression or anxiety, but is nowadays also used, for example, for bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, for some form of eating disorders, for obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychosis, schizophrenia, sleep problems, and drug addiction. Now, what is CBT? CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, sets out with the assumption that our emotions and our feelings and our level of distress are closely related to our actions and our thought patterns in a form of a triangle. So you have the emotions, you have the thoughts, and you have the behavior. Of course, I now physically showed you a triangle. You can't see it because this is a podcast, but apparently I still need to get used to that. But I'm sure you can imagine a triangle, and each corner one of the 3 things: emotion, behavior, and thoughts. And cognitive behavioral therapy believes that if you work on one of them, you can influence the other ones. So if you are in a, for example, high state of feeling anxious, you can either work on your thought pattern or on your behavior, most likely on both, to work on your feelings of anxiety. The same goes with depression and all of the other disorders I have just described. Now, important to remember is that CBT in most cases, at least from what I know and have learned, this is not again, not a professional statement. This is all my own experiences, so do with it what you will. CBT is best and most commonly used, or should at least most commonly be used, for when people are in a crisis situation, or as a first help situation. I don't, from my own experience, believe that CBT can be a form of therapy that can be done for multiple years, because once you know the techniques and you feel confident in using them in your own times of distress, there's really nothing more it can give you. And the next step then is another form of therapy that deals with more of the root problems, if that is something that you or your medical professional decide is good for you. Now, how did I come to have CBT as my form of therapy? Well, I need to go back a bit further with this. Like I mentioned in the last episode, it took a while between my New Year's Eve SpongeBob Monopoly breakdown and my first therapy session. Obviously not as long as it takes many other people that have to wait so much longer because of the terrible system. Go back to the last episode if you want to know more about my thoughts about that. But in between, because I was so eager to get help, because I never ever wanted to feel like I felt on that evening, on that night, I, with the help of my partner who made some suggestions, looked into some self-help books that could help me, and the book that helped me the most, and I'm not sponsored or anything by this, is by Joshua Fletcher. It's called Anxiety, Panicking About Panic, a powerful self-help guide for people suffering from an anxiety or panic disorder. Now, anyone who suffered from panic or anxiety will know that with it comes a lot of physical symptoms, and especially if you are new to it or you experience them for the first time, they can be very scary. So scary when you feel your body is completely out of control, or you feel you can't think straight anymore, or your heart is racing, you have vertigo, you can't sleep, or you cannot do anything but sleep, or you have constipation, or you have irritable bowel syndrome, or you have diarrhea, all the other physical symptoms and mental symptoms that come along with anxiety. And this is why this book is so helpful. The author put in a big list right at the beginning of the book. So in the first few pages, they just list all of the different things that come with anxiety. For example, the psychological symptoms can be excessive worry, panic attacks, derealization, feeling lucid and detached from surroundings, depersonalization, feeling detached from persona personality, feeling apprehensive, hypochondria, the fear of a panic attack, body checking, repetitive and looping thoughts, feeling terrified, obsessive thoughts, inability to relax, difficulty completing tasks, feeling hopeless and depressed, overactive imagination, agoraphobia, and so on and so forth. And then they go on to talk about the physical symptoms: heart palpitations, headaches, lightheadedness, exhaustion, constant lethargy, irregular bowel movements, chest pains, chest ache, then chest pains is a sharp stabbing, bloating, tickling, fluttering sensations, nausea, constant pacing, dizziness, perspiration, tinnitus, stomach cramps, eye floaters, symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, rib pains, rib discomfort, stomach rumbling, dry mouth, feeling tired after eating, abdominal pains, shooting pains in back and abdomen, neck ache and pains, ache behind eyes, erectile dysfunction, jaw ache and tenderness, and the list goes on and on and on, because there are so many completely disconnected symptoms that go along with anxiety, because our body, when we are really anxious, is completely out of control. It's just trying to give you any signal in any shape or form to tell you, here's something not right, do something about it. And of course, we don't always know what to do about it, or we don't know what it even is, and sometimes we don't even realize that we are completely anxious. This is why sometimes it feels like when you have a panic attack, especially for the first time, you feel like it's coming out of nowhere. And that's what I felt on that evening when I had my very first, or at least I noticed it to be as my very first panic attack. I, in retrospect, can tell that I had some more beforehand. I thought it was completely out of the blue, but that wasn't true, because I realized that was actually my second panic attack. Because my first panic attack I had a few weeks before this at the dentist, where I had a root canal treatment, and my circulatory system just collapsed. I was really white. The nurse told me after they injected the anesthetic into my gums, and they gave me some water, and I then stopped the treatment and asked them to do it another time, because I couldn't really breathe, and I felt really dizzy and lightheaded, and I wasn't breathing properly, which is one of the biggest, well, not for me at least, it is for me, I should clarify, it is for me one of the things that leads to panic attack is my very irregular breathing. And I didn't notice it was a panic attack because I thought I connected it to the treatment. But what actually happened was that the entire day before this, I hadn't been to the dentist for a big treatment for 10 years, I'm going to say, before this. I was thinking, oh, what if, I suddenly have this allergic reaction to the anesthetic, or something goes wrong and I suffocate or asphyxiate on something and I die. And then all day I had this thought, oh, today, what did I do today? Well, I ate some nice food at least. I was productive for someone else because I did some research job for a professor I was working for at the time. I didn't do anything for my master thesis I was supposed to be working on at the time. And the thought in my mind was this day worth living? And if I die today at the dentist, will I have led a good life? Will I have been happy? And is it okay to die for me? And am I okay with dying? And what does it even mean? And all of these thoughts were with me the entire day. But of course I suppressed them, or I didn't really realize that I was, ruminating these thoughts the entire time and the entire day, up until the point where they are sitting in that room by myself waiting for the anesthetic to work, and all these thoughts came crashing in my head, and I had this massive attack of anxiety that made me go pale, that made me feel dizzy, that made me breathe even worse, made my heart beat fast, which is why I had to go home, like I did on that day, New Year's Eve, where the few days before I turned 29, knowing, oh God, next year or this year, because my birthday is on the 30th of December, and so New Year's Day was 2 days after my birthday, and I knew this was the last day in my 20s, in my 20s. I was going to turn 30, and all the stuff I hadn't done, all the stuff I hadn't reached by the time I was 30, and also something that my sister told me when I was a child, that by the time she was 30, life would be over. She might could basically end her life then, because after 30 nothing matters anymore, which everybody told me. So to me, 30 was like this cap of life. Afterwards, I'm dead. And I kept these thoughts in my head ever since my birthday, and even before my birthday, and for weeks and months even, I was thinking about this, that, oh God, the 30 is coming. It's this big thing that's coming ahead of me, and I can't change it. Time is just moving on, and I can't reach all the goals I'm supposed to have reached by that time, according to society. And all of these thoughts just crashed in on me. Well, they didn't crash on me. I had them for weeks and weeks, but the anxiety crashed in on me on that day, in this particular time, and turned into this panic attack. Yeah, so there I was. And when I read the book and the first few pages, there were so many symptoms I could take off because I had them. And it was such a relief to read when the author described how they were completely overwhelmed by their first panic attack that just came about when they were making some coffee at work. And yeah, it felt good to know that other people feel the same, and there's a way out of it. And in the book, the author does give some of the CBT techniques that I learned further in therapy later on. So I could already take away that, okay, at least I know that when I feel this way, when I have these bodily feelings, because obviously one of my fears, which I will be talking more about in the next episode, so stay tuned, is the fear of dying. So whenever my body does something it's not supposed to do, have an irregular heart rate, breathe improperly, be dizzy for no obvious reason, it triggers even more fear of death. Oh God, this is it. This is the moment. Now I'm done. Which led to sleepless nights, which led to constipation, which led to completely and utter time waste at the computer looking up what the symptom could mean, and if it means death, how much time do I have? What can be done about it if it's not immediately terminal? But I will talk more about this in the next episode. Yeah, now I had this list of symptoms, and I saw, okay, just because I have all of these symptoms, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to die. It just means that I'm very, very anxious about dying. Yeah, and this is what CBT, where CBT comes in, because now just knowing that I have these symptoms because of my anxiety did calm me down, but it didn't make them go away. They kept on going and coming back. They kept on overwhelming me because they kept on overwhelming me. So skip forward a few months when I had my first few therapy sessions, and my therapist diagnosed me with clinical depression and anxiety and panic disorder. And we had the first few discussions about what the fear meant, what happened, what was going on with my body, and what were the massive triggers that led me to have a high state of anxiety, leading sometimes into panic attacks. Sometimes I would wake up from a sleep and immediately go into a panic attack. And sometimes I wouldn't sleep at all. And sometimes I would lie on the sofa, not being able to move, even to do most basic things like going to the bathroom. And one of the things that always immediately made me feel incredibly anxious was whenever I felt dizzy. And as I've just read out that dizziness is one of the symptoms of anxiety, it's a quite vicious cycle when you feel dizzy because you're anxious, and then the dizziness makes you feel even more anxious, and then that even more anxious makes you even feel more dizzy. And there's no coming out of it, because my body was completely associating the dizziness with death immediately at some point. That's how far it got. I was dizzy, okay, I'm dying. Okay, I'm dying, panic, because I can't change it. Panic attack. And yeah, that was some quite terrible few months. So one of the techniques my therapist, or not techniques, but some of the things my therapist that made me do was to re-familiarize myself with the feeling of dizziness without it being dangerous immediately. Because something else he told me was that, one of the things he explained to me is that on the one hand, dizziness does not come with any specific disease or illness. So there's no, like, just because if you're dizzy, you have this 1, 2, 3, or 4 diseases. And it also is something that just happens, especially to people that are very anxious, because it relates to the muscles in the back and the jaw that tense up when we don't breathe, or when we clench our jaw. So by being anxious, you make yourself more dizzy, which makes you more anxious, especially me. And in order for that feeling not to immediately send me into a panic, I had to familiarize myself with it again. So first, in his room, during the therapy sessions, we spun around for a minute, just on the spot, spun around as fast as possible. And then I had to immediately, after a minute, stop and lie down. And anyone who remembers how that is from childhood, or still from just having done it recently, the world just keeps on spinning, and it is nauseating, and it feels very, very uncomfortable. And of course, I, in that session, immediately went into a panic attack after we did this for the first time, which for the remainder of that session meant we had to calm me down. But it was my homework. Between sessions, I had sessions every week. Between these sessions, every day, I should pick a minute 3 times a day and just do it. Spin for a minute, and then be in that dizziness for a minute. And whilst being in that dizziness, whilst feeling the sensation of dizziness, to work on being mindful of the fact that there was a reason why I was dizzy. That dizziness does not automatically mean something dangerous is happening to me, and that my body can sometimes do funny things without it meaning anything. And it felt really strange doing that in his practice, doing it at home, sometimes going to the bathroom at work to do it there. But it worked. A few months later, I no longer associated dizziness with anything dangerous, but just with the annoying practice of spinning around for a minute 3 times a day for weeks on end. So that was one of the techniques that he used in the therapy. One of the, I don't know if it's specifically CBT or it's just a technique that he came up with on the spot, but it is one of those things where where I had a feeling, and my thoughts and my behavior needed to change. My behavior was, I felt dizzy, and I immediately, in my behavior, started to check my body. Okay, what is wrong with me? What's going on? And my thoughts were immediately like, this is dangerous. This is not okay. Something is wrong. And I also looked up in the internet. What could it mean? What's going on here? So I had to change my thoughts and my behavior whenever I felt dizzy. In order to do that, I had to feel dizzy at specific times, because anyone who knows, if you want to do any kind of, for example, sport, you have to train it constantly, even when you're not actually playing the match. For example, if you play football or anything like that. So this was very similar. And the same went for one of the other things that was really, really painful for me, because I couldn't stop myself, was the ruminating, the thinking about what was happening, what would happen after I die, but more about this, as I said in the next episode. What could these symptoms mean? And so I spent hours and hours looking up different things on the internet, seeing if my body was doing anything wrong, if anything was going on, if anything was happening. So he set me a limit. First I had only this many hours a day, then only this many minutes, and then maybe days without it. And he helped me to stop ruminating, because it made me realize how much time I was wasting, and that most of the time I wouldn't get an answer anyways. But this wasn't the only way. It wasn't just the practice stuff. It was also learning to think differently. And this is much easier said than done, and it doesn't help everyone. It's not like we can say everyone with any mental illness, or with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or any of the other ones, or just, change your thoughts and you'll be better off. In order to change your thoughts, you need to change your behavior, and you need to work on your feelings. It's all these three things. And I'm not going to be able to give an entire account of a CBT therapy approach, because, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional. And it would take way too much time. But whilst I had these exercises to do, I also was encouraged by my therapist to meditate often, to learn to not to push thoughts away, I'm sorry. So I was encouraged to meditate by my therapist, to learn to accept uncomfortable thoughts and accept uncomfortable feelings, and to learn that nothing bad would happen from just the thoughts and the feelings, and to accept that they were there and that they didn't control me, but that I controlled them. And there were different exercises, different situations. We also worked on my fear of heights, which was stopping me from enjoying many things in my life, because I live in a city that is by a river, and whenever you want to go on any nice cycle rides or walks, there's quite a few bridges you need to cross, and I wasn't able to cross these bridges anymore without being either very, very anxious or avoiding them altogether. So we also worked on my fear of heights, and there were different approaches, so-called exposure session. And exposure session does what the word says. You expose yourself to the thing you are afraid of. You don't just get pushed into the lake, but it's talked about beforehand what to expect. I was supposed to write down what my fear was, what I was expecting to happen, and then we talked about it, and then we talked about some boundaries that wouldn't be crossed, and that I had every opportunity to say no during, but I was very much encouraged to stay in the fear as long until it went down to a certain level. And we went on bridges that I was very afraid of, and I had to walk across that bridge I don't know how many times, and then I had to cycle across that bridge I don't know how many times, until I was no longer associating that bridge with fear. And then I also had to climb up a freestanding tower. That was so bad, because it took me many attempts to get up there, and once I was up there I was just crying with both belief and fear. And then obviously the more I cried out of fear, the longer I had to stay up there, because I wasn't supposed to leave until the fear went down a certain to a certain percentile, because it's okay to be afraid. It is the goal of the therapy was not to stop me having fear or to stop me being afraid. That should not be the point of CBT, as far as I understand it, and certainly wasn't with my therapy. The goal was for me to be able to accept the fear, to make objective choices about which fears I'm not letting me hold back, and which fears I accept to be fears, and I will not do this. So I will not climb any like free fall, Solo was the film. Where he climbs up that wall that is a few 100 or even 1,000 meters high, without any ropes attached to them. Yeah, that's not, no way that I'm going to do this, but I no longer will have my fear stop me from crossing any of those bridges. And now I'm very happy to walk over them, and I sometimes struggle to remember why I was so afraid. But then one of them is a pedestrian and train bridge, two actually. And once a train crosses the bridge at the same time that I'm on it and it vibrates a lot, I remember again. But that doesn't stop me. I'll still do it. And amongst other, it's not always comfortable. I would say it's almost never comfortable to CBT. And there's some tasks that I found very, very difficult and would still do. For example, another thing I was struggling with was my self-worth and being able to do things like this, putting myself in vulnerable places in public, and also accepting that I can do things. And one of the methods or techniques that we used in the therapy was something that's called the inner child, which the basic theory behind it is that we have, a healthy adult has three people inside them. They have the inner child, they have the critic, and they have the healthy adult. I'm just doing quotation marks around the healthy adult part. And we've learned that the inner child has a desire, the critic tells the child off, and then the healthy adult tells the critic or the child which one is, correct. And we have learned over time to listen, to be that reasonable voice in our head. I had not, and still haven't 100%. This is why this took me 2 years to do this podcast. Yeah, and so I had to, in that session, have 3 seats, be the inner child and say what this thing that I'm not doing, what the child wants, what is the need of the child, which I found weird because it was just him and me in there, and I had to open myself up a lot in front of this basically stranger, and then I had to be the critic and tell myself off, and then I had to turn into a unreasonable adult, which, who is that? And then not mentor, is that the right word? Basically, do diplomacy between these two people, me, in different stages. And yeah, that was awkward. And I also had to talk to myself, to my reflection in mirrors and in windows. And I had to talk to myself, write letters to myself. I had to, and they were all very uncomfortable, but they helped me accepting other help as well. One of the things, so this was later in therapy, of course. At the beginning, and maybe I should have structured this better, but I'm going now back to the beginning. What is CBT is very good at. It helps you, or it helped me, and I've heard other people that it helped them too. Helps to deal with the fear so that you can then move on to deal with the problem behind the fear. And the techniques I had, for example, was to learn to control my breathing, even though I am in a high state of anxiety, to keep my mind occupied. So, we have the behavior, we have the thoughts, and we have the feelings. And if you control the behavior and the thoughts, then you control the feelings. So, for example, when I am really, 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 really anxious, now I am afraid of dentists, as you maybe suspect after that experience. So now every time I go to the dentist, I get anxiety, and then I sit in the waiting room. And one of the techniques I do is to either breathe out until I reach the count of 5, and breathe in until I reach the count of 4. Or sometimes when I'm very anxious, I count until the count of 7, and I count until the count of 5. Or I describe myself 5 things I see, 5 things I hear, 5 things I feel, and then 4 things I see, 4 things I hear, 4 things I feel, up until I'm 0. And all of these things are meant to take away the attention to the body, to the fear symptoms, so that the thoughts are focused not on the fear but on something else, and you can calm down, and then you can look at the fear from a more objective perspective. But you need to learn these things, or I needed to learn these things, when I wasn't in crisis, because you can't. That is something that I have seen other people do. They are in a crisis, they look up methods, they do them while they're in the crisis, they don't immediately work, and then they stop because it didn't work. But if, for example, you want to become a football champion, you don't just show up on the pitch on the day of the championship, and then if you don't win, you're like, well, I guess it wasn't me then. But you train, you prepare, you do stuff when you're not in the situation to be able to do them when you are in the situation. And this is what mindfulness and CBT does. All these exercises, all these mindfulness breathing techniques and thinking and writing stuff down, and all of these things are there for when I am in crisis. I have this toolkit, which I can pick and choose which one I think will help me most, or try one, didn't work, try the other, didn't work, try the next. But I practice them regularly when I'm not in a crisis, so that when I'm in a crisis, I can use them and they help me. Yeah. And this is why CBT is very, very, very good to help people in a crisis. But this is also why I believe it is not good to be something to do for years and years on end. Because once you've learned these techniques and you've learned to deal with the fear, then you don't need to do more CBT because you already know. Of course, you need to practice it for the rest of your life, or for the rest of the time, until that problem that leads you to be anxious or depressed or any of the other things is resolved, if that is possible. But you can't learn more and more techniques just because, there's a finite amount of techniques. It's not infinitive. Infinitive? Finite? Infinite. That's the one. Not a native speaker, in case you haven't noticed by now. Yeah. And I myself also am not done with therapy. I'm taking a break. I finished my therapy. I started my therapy in early to mid 2019, and I finished in the end of 2020. So I had almost 2 years of therapy. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. I finished in November of 2020. So I had almost 2 years of therapy. And I'm not done. I'm taking a break because I'm focusing on other things now, and I am not in many crisis situations. But I do still notice that things stop me from being the person that I want to be. So in the future, I will need to do another therapy that is not focused on CBT, because now I no longer end up in crisis mode without my toolkit. I have my toolkit, so the crisis comes and then goes. But now I need to work on the things that lead me into the crisis, but also the things that lead me into crises of another nature, not being happy. I am very happy most of the time, but sometimes I do things and I'm like, why the fuck did you just do this? And I can't stop myself, and that is something I need to work on. And this is a different type of therapy, maybe a trauma therapy. Why that would be good for me, you will also find out in the course of the episodes. Or just a talk therapy, maybe. Any of these things will be good. And I'm very fortunate that I am able to look at this from this perspective and being able to see, okay, I don't need this now, but I will I have that option in the future, and I will take it when I am in the right state. And right now I am good with where I am. I have my depression so far under control that the periods are shorter and not as frequent, and that I do the things I need to do in order for that to stay that way. Because this is also something I learned because of CBT, is that I need to train my CBT methods so that when I'm anxious and have anxiety or depressive thoughts, I can use them then. But when I'm not depressed, I need to do stuff, or when I'm not anxious, I need to do stuff so that I don't get there as often or for as long. So I exercise regularly. And I'm not perfect, sometimes I don't. But then I notice that my depression comes back quicker. So that encourages me to do it more. I try to eat as healthy also, not perfect. Sometimes it doesn't work, or quite often. And then I come back into a more frequent or longer phase of depression. I try to be kind to myself. I try to do things that I enjoy, and I try to do things difficult and then do things that I enjoy. And all of these different approaches and these different techniques and these different methods I have learned over these 2 years of therapy, and afterwards. I've learned afterwards by continuously being engaged with the topic and with my mental health, because I don't want to be the person I was 2 years ago, and I definitely don't want to be the person I was 10 years ago. These are my experiences with CBT. Very briefly, I'm sure I forgot a lot of things, but I don't want to make these episodes too long. If you want to know more about this, just message me and I'll see if I can make another episode. If you disagree with me strongly, please let me know. I'm happy to learn new perspectives. And in general, let me know how you are, how you're feeling. If you want to be part of the show, anonymously or not, you can email me or fill out the anonymous form, contact form on the website. And this is it for today. I hope I hear you again next week, or I hope you hear me again next week. And I would appreciate it so much if you would give this podcast, especially on Apple Podcast, but on every other app that you use, if there's the possibility to rate and review, give it a favorable rating or review, or a negatively if you really hate it. Obviously, always appreciate that input as well. And tell your friends, your family about this podcast, or about you. Have a dialogue, and I hear you, and I hope you hear me next week.